Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 317. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. I have a ton of content to cover on today's show. I think about 10 articles that I've written myself, so I don't want to spend too much time on the plugs. This is going to be a big show, so if you can share it, it's at the Institute. It's at antiwar.com. It's on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. Anywhere you could listen to podcasts. You follow me on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone _, or you could follow the show at con_interest. You could support the show by doing your CBD shopping with our sponsor, Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde, CBD.com. The promo code is PEACE. They have a wide selection of high quality CBD products. They're adding new things all the time. So if you haven't done your shopping at Paloma Verde in a while, consider going back. They had this new full spectrum product that's absolutely awesome. The co-host kind of recommends it. Of course, my favorite is the sports cream, but we get the most great feedback on their dog treats. People tell us that, hey, this has really helped my dog's behavior, pain level for the dog themselves, especially as they get older, helps with anxiety. So you want to help out your dog, help out yourself, get some fantastic CBD products. When you spend $75 or more, you use the promo code PEACE. That will get you 20% off, and it gets the show a kickback. So it's a great way to help yourself while supporting your favorite podcast. All right, now let's get into the show. And Havana Syndrome is back in the headlines again, and I wrote this article for the Libertarian Institute on August 24th. The CIA begins making payments to agents who suffer from an illness that likely doesn't exist. America's spy agency is making compensation payments to agents who claim they suffer from Havana Syndrome. The alleged condition was first reported by government employees in Cuba who reported suffering various symptoms, including dizziness, headaches, and memory loss. The CIA has studied over 1,000 potential cases of the mysterious ailment and has been unable to prove it exists. Havana was brought into the spotlight during the early Trump administration. In 2017, U.S. officials stationed in Havana reported vague set of symptoms. The White House responded by rolling back Barack Obama's policy of normalizing the relationship with Cuba. At the time, people who asserted they were suffering from Havana Syndrome claimed it was caused by a foreign power using sonic or microwave weapons. Some officials recorded the sound generated by the alleged weapon, which was later determined to be merely crickets. Multiple government agencies have examined 1,000 cases of people who claiming to be Havana Syndrome victims. Natural causes have explained nearly all cases. Many people were merely experiencing psychosomatic symptoms. There has been a few cases where alternative causes cannot explain the symptoms. And so, they say, look, we got 1,000 people here who all say that they have one of these vague symptoms: memory loss, dizziness, hearing problems. They say that, they're not as sharp as they used to be, things like this. And of all those cases, except for like a dozen of them, the CIA was able to pinpoint, no, it's this condition, this one psychosomatic, whatever. And so in those few dozen cases, and those people who work for the CIA are now receiving compensation payments, even though Havana Syndrome hasn't even been proven to exist. So this is a pretty wild thing to be going on here. This was authorized through the Havana Act, which was passed last October. Now, the reason I pay so much attention and spend so much time on Havana Syndrome on this show is because how it's been used by various administrations. It's not just the Trump administration that took and exploited Havana Syndrome in order to try to, build the worst sentiment in the United States. And so, of course, he did it to break down Obama's detente in the beginning, and then later, when the CIA was saying that, Havana Syndrome doesn't exist. And in one specific case, they said that this agent did not suffer from Havana Syndrome. And then that agent went, and I think it was with like Vogue or Variety or one of GQ maybe, did a profile on this guy, and Havana Syndrome was then weaponized kind of against the White House to say, why aren't you doing more about Russia? Because, obviously Russia is carrying out these attacks all over the world. In the Biden administration, it's really come back with a lot of force, although it hasn't met the headlines, I think, because of everything else that's going on. And of course, up until very recently, I think if I had written a headline like I did for this particular article, I really was worried about it getting taken off of most sites and things like that, because I think people would have assumed that I was like trying to make some kind of conspiracy about COVID, where really I'm talking about the very unproven Havana Syndrome. So I fully expect that this is going to become a bigger and bigger thing as the government pays out more and more money for it. And that, when Kamala Harris is supposed to go to Hanoi, and then some agent says, oh, I'm having headaches today, blah, blah, blah. Then they use it to make a bigger deal out of Kamala's trip. And it's some kind of dangerous excursion for her to go. To Hanoi or something like that. So I think we're going to see more and more of this as we go on, especially as the money is now flowing. All right, the next article I wrote, again, August 24th for the Libertarian Institute. This is really important, and it's a big story. It didn't get a lot of attention, and I think part of the reason why is everybody who's already listening to this show and listening to most independent media already knows that this is true, right? That there's this idea that Russia and China, Iran, other countries exploit U.S. social media in order to influence Americans. But people who spend time on social media and have any kind of skeptical view of the government already know that the U.S. government influences social media far more than any other country. But kind of like we were talking about in the last article, this is the kind of thing where some people get pretty nervous, or, you get some censorship on social media for talking about this, because it's really just supposed to be focusing on the Russian and the Chinese misinformation, not talking about what the U.S. does. But we have a study here that really exposes a lot. So study exposes information campaign pushing pro-American narratives on Twitter and Facebook. Graphica and the Stanford Internet Observatory released a study showing a series of covert campaigns over a period of almost 5 years that pushed pro-Western misinformation on Twitter, Facebook, and 5 other social media platforms. The operation targeted people living in Central Asia and the Middle East. An investigation was launched after Twitter and Meta turned over the data on 2 overlapping accounts, Graphica and overlapping accounts to Graphica and the Stanford Internet Observatory. The accounts were removed in July and August for violating terms of service, including platform manipulation and authentic behavior. The fake accounts deployed misinformation to set narratives supporting Western geopolitical goals. According to the executive summary of the study, our joint investigation found an interconnected web of accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and 5 other social media platforms that use deceptive tactics to promote Western narratives in the Middle East and Central Asia. It continues, the platform's data sets appear to cover a series of covert campaigns over a period of almost 5 years rather than one homogeneous operation. One operation by the covert accounts was directed at Central Asia. A narrative of the fake accounts tried to spread was painting Russia as the looming enemy. The study said assets in the group consistently portrayed Russia as a threat to Central Asia. A recurring narrative claimed that Russia is abusing the Russian Central Asian Partnership, mainly the CSTO, to extract one-sided benefits. The assets also said Central Asian countries must leave these organizations if they wish to retake their full sovereignty from Russia. The Central Asian operations also sought to portray Russia as a villain and support the war effort in Ukraine. On several occasions, the accounts attempted to generate hashtags supporting Kiev. The covert account campaigns against Iran linked to articles from fake media outlets to spread misinformation. The report says several suspended accounts were linked to 2 sham media outlets operating in Persian. However, not all posts were linked to phony media accounts. The accounts frequently linked to stories from U.S. government-funded sources like Voice of America. A different operation attempted to set the discourse on the war in Yemen. These accounts shared critical content of Iranian and Houthi rebel activity in Yemen. Posts accused the Houthi rebel leaders of blocking humanitarian aid delivery and acting for proxies against Iran and Hezbollah, the report authors wrote. While Graphica and the Stanford Internet Observatory did not name a culprit for the misinformation campaigns, they say they were likely ineffective at spreading misinformation. The data shows that the limits of using inauthentic tactics to generate engagement and build influence online. The vast majority of posts and tweets reviewed received no more than a handful of likes or retweets. And so there's a lot to this that's really important. And I believe I'm actually going to be on Fault Lines Radio tomorrow morning during their last hour to discuss this and likely go into just a little bit more detail there because I'll have a little bit more time. People will be asking me questions. But of course, who's behind this is a big question. If it's any way related to the American government or even a lobbyist, the military industrial complex, that's extremely interesting that they're trying this. I think one of the most interesting parts to me was that, they acknowledged that this was really unsuccessful. And I think that that's important because that's similar to, I think, what largely came out of the Russiagate investigation was that, the actions of the Internet Research Agency, this Russian company, not directly associated with the Kremlin or anything like that, but they did, attempt to, I think, basically a clickbot kind of farm in the United States. But you can see that a lot of their posts that involve politics didn't get any reaction or anything at all. That it was mostly just kind of silly, more posts like Dodds and Buff Bernie and things like that. So overall, I don't think that these are extremely effective. Now, maybe one day I will be proven wrong on that, and the U.S. or somebody will be able to wage such a prolific, inauthentic campaign that, they're able to really move political opinion. But I think the way that opinion gets moved on these sites is more by the algorithm of Facebook and Twitter in this systematic level rather than at this very micro level. Now, that again, that doesn't make this not a story because, of course, whoever is doing this, there's reasons for it, and it's really interesting. And of course, so I think the war in Yemen was the one I really want to hit on here because just the details that the report said were, easier to break down. It's kind of vague on the war in Ukraine. They just want to support the war in Ukraine. Well, in Yemen, they're saying things that factually aren't correct. Like the Houthis are responsible for blocking humanitarian aid deliveries. This is clearly Saudi Arabia or acting as proxies for Iran and Hezbollah, which isn't true. The Houthis are their own independent force fighting Saudi Arabia, and they do have a minor relationship with with Tehran, but that certainly isn't the biggest news story that we have today. A couple stories on let's see. Oh, this next one, I have Navy fights with Congress to decommission little crappy ships. Jeff Shogel of Task and Purpose wrote a really good article here, just going through what's going on between Congress and the Pentagon. The Pentagon wants to get rid of 5 literal combat ships. This is the LCS program. They're called little crappy ships because they never worked right. And so there are 4 of the ships that are less than 5 years old. They're going to decommission 5 in total, but Congress is trying to prevent this from happening. So, and Jeff Shogel at Task and Purpose is certainly somebody worth reading. I may not, agree with everything he writes, but a lot of it is very good. All right, now let's move on and talk about some Russia news or war in Ukraine, NATO, all that kind of stuff. We got a lot here. This story from I wrote for antiwar.com on August 26th. New York Times, Russian annexation plans pressure Zelensky to retake territory soon. The New York Times reports Ukraine's President Zelensky is facing pressure on multiple fronts to launch a counter-offensive and bring the war to a military end. Russia is planning a series of referendums and likely annexations of captured territory in the coming months. A former defense minister is publicly warning Kiev that war fatigue could set in. Former defense minister Andriy Zarganovsk, maybe at the end, Nusk, issued a call for Zelensky to launch an offensive in Ukraine's Prava. The very difficult state of our economy, the constant risk of air raids and missile attacks, and the general fatigue on the population from difficulties of war will work against Ukraine, he said. He argued for more Ukrainian forces to go on the offensive and end the war quickly. He said, "It will make no sense to drag this war out for years and compete to see who will run out of resources first. It is unclear if Kiev's forces are capable of offensive operations as Russian soldiers have continued to slowly advance." And so this is, I think the first part of what he says, there's probably a lot of truth to it, that for the Ukrainian people, there's some more fatigue starting to set in. The rally around the flag effect lasts so long, but, you get tired of not having the food you want, things being unsafe and things like that. And so, if people are maybe shifting from, we're willing to fight for years and years and years to retake all of our territory from Russia, to what can we do to have this go on no longer, that's really important. Now, the second thing he's saying, where we, need to go on the offensive. Part of me thinks that if Ukraine could go on the offensive and end the war quickly, Zelensky would have ordered that already, and that the reason they haven't is because they lack the capability to do so. But back to the article here. Kiev could wait for more weapons to arrive from NATO countries, but time is becoming a factor. Russian plans to stage referendums in occupied territory that could lead to a claim of annexations as early as next month, putting additional time pressure on Mr. Zelensky to launch an offensive, Andrew E. Kramer wrote in the New York Times. Ukraine says it has currently shifted to a strategy of deep war. Those operations attempted to strike Russian ammunition dumps and other strategic targets deep in Russian territory. In the past 2 months, Kiev says it destroyed over 150 ammunition dumps, 91 bases for weapons storage, 4 barracks housing soldiers, 4 fuel depots, and 8 command posts. Now, even the Times admit they can't verify this. It does seem that this strategy is happening, that Ukraine has, especially now that they have the HIMARS and other systems, they have attempted to strike relatively deep within Russian territory and have definitely hit some ammo dumps and other targets that have some logistical supply value. But the numbers that Ukraine's putting up seem awfully high. The Times reports further indication of coming counteroffensives from Kiev is the White House including mine-clearing equipment and recent weapons packages. If Ukrainian forces are successful in retaking territory, the equipment will be vital in minimizing losses, as of course Russia may have mined some of the territory it has taken. So we got some of the details from the $3 million package. Now, this is interesting because it kind of cuts against the counteroffensive talk, where this is talking about the White House is not taking $3 billion through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which is technically just moving around weapons that the Pentagon already owns, right? So, the Pentagon has 100 HIMARS. I don't know how many they have, but let's say they have 100, right? And Biden says, I'm going to send 20 of those and transfer them to control of Kiev. That the Presidential Drawdown Authority does. These contracts are coming differently because he's actually going to Lockheed Martin and he's saying, like, hey, we need 6 additional National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems with additional munitions. Now you're going to sign this contract and build it, which means we're talking 6 months, 12 months, years down the line. And so this is the contents of the $2.98 billion package, and some of the highlights are, again, the 6 National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems with additional munitions, up to basically 250,000 rounds of 155 millimeter artillery ammunition, 65,000 rounds of 120 millimeter mortar ammunition, 40 counter artillery radar systems, Puma unmanned aerial systems and support equipment for Scan Eagle drones, Vampire counter unmanned aerial systems, laser guided rocket systems, funding for training, maintenance, and sustainment. So that is just that's most of what the big articles are in the aid package. Now, Will Porter has a really important article out here at the Libertarian Institute. British PM hopeful says she's ready to launch nuclear war. UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has declared that she is ready and willing to kick off a thermonuclear warfare should she take over as Prime Minister, stretching her hawkish bona fides as she seeks to replace Boris Johnson. Appearing at a town hall event in Birmingham on Tuesday, Truss was asked how she felt about ordering global annihilation in the event of a nuclear standoff with a foreign adversary. "I won't ask you if you would push the button. You'll say yes, but faced with the task, I feel like I would be physically sick, host John Pinar, who went on to ask, "How does that make you feel?" "I think it's an important duty of the Prime Minister, and I'm willing to do that," Truss replied, drawing applause from the audience. When Paneer asked again how that decision would make her feel, she simply said, "I'm ready to do it." So if you watch the video, it's pretty clear that Liz Truss just doesn't feel. While no foreign state was mentioned in name during the exchange, Truss has been among the most bellicose officials in her comments about the war in Ukraine, issuing a steady stream of hostile rhetoric towards Moscow while encouraging escalation at virtually every turn. Despite serving as their country's top diplomat, the foreign secretary has made little effort to seek out any diplomatic solution to the conflict, instead calling on Russia's defeat on the battlefield regardless of the cost in Ukrainian blood. With Prime Minister Boris Johnson preparing to leave office after announcing his resignation in July, Truss is now vying against former Finance Minister Rishi Sunak for the top PM spot. While Johnson's hawkish stance towards Russia may be hard to outdo, having visited Kiev multiple times in recent months to discourage the negotiated settlement to the war, his replacement appears set to continue London's policies on conflict regardless of who wins. And I think the part about Truss that's important here is that she is the sitting foreign minister of Ukraine. And so, this isn't like any kind of variation of her policies to say things like this. This is who she is, and this is who the UK has negotiating with Russia. Next article, myself and Will Porter wrote for the Libertarian Institute on August 26th. America imported over $6 billion in goods from Russia since Ukraine invasion. In response to Russia's attack on Ukraine, President Joe Biden vowed to isolate and cripple the Russian economy. However, Moscow has been able to maintain its economic strength in part by exporting over $1 billion per month in wood, metals, and food and other goods to the United States. More than 3,600 ships from Russia have arrived at U.S. ports since February 24th, according to statistics cited by the Associated Press. While that is nearly half the shipments over the same period as compared to last year, it still amounts to over $6 billion in imports. The number of Russian products entering the U.S. suggests the Biden administration is falling short of its pledge to isolate Moscow's economy. Due to so-called wind-down periods that allow companies to continue to complete previous deals, some of the goods continue to enter the country long after the White House announced sanctions on those products, including oil and gas. Paradoxically, other Russian imports, such as fertilizer, came at the request of the Biden administration, which has urged American companies to make up for shortages. And while the White House has seized several luxury yachts owned by rich Russians with loose ties to President Vladimir Putin, the AP found that American and European firms are importing millions of dollars in metals from a Russian company that makes parts for Moscow's fighter jets, highlighting another odd discrepancy in Biden's sanctions campaign. Despite domestic political pressure from Washington, other American allies are increasing their ties with Russia. Turkey, a NATO member, has doubled its imports of Russian oil this year. During the Biden presidency, he has taken several steps to strengthen ties with New Delhi, with the American troops currently engaged in war games with India on the Chinese border. But like Ankara, the country has similarly significantly increased its energy imports from Moscow. The Indian rupee has also become a major currency for the diamond trade, allowing buyers to bypass U.S. sanctions. Though Western economic war was meant to negate Moscow's military might and bring it to the negotiation table, it has so far had little success. With Russian energy exports topping pre-war levels in recent months and the ruble rallying against the dollar, Russia's economy appears to have fared far better than much of Europe since fighting erupted last winter. All right, next article is from got the wrong article loaded up here, actually. So the next thing I have set to talk about is just some stories from my news roundup that I didn't write up into articles. And the first one I have is from Kelly Vlahos at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Kelly's great. This Institute for Statecraft is great. So the Biden administration plans to name its military operation for Ukraine. This is just like a little more of a signpost kind of story, I think, than like new $300 million shipment or anything, $3 billion shipment or anything like that. But at the same time, I think this is something that really signals how far we've gone in supporting this war. Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition William LaPlante says the U.S. has made U.S. wanted to increase the production of HIMARS to Ukraine. LaPlante made these statements after visiting Lockheed Martin. So we're going to encourage Lockheed to make more HIMARS to support Ukraine. And of course, if we are talking about Lockheed Martin building more facilities or hiring more people even to assemble and build these weapons, we are talking years down the line now that they are planning on churning out these HIMARS and sending them to Ukraine to continue to fight in this war. The Army has selected General Dynamics Land Systems to provide 250 Abrams tanks to Poland for $1.1 billion. The largest nuclear power plant in Europe, ZNPP, was disconnected from Ukraine's energy grid, and Russia is in control of ZNPP. I believe that was reconnected, though, in the past day. Hungary announces a $12 billion contract with a Russian firm to build 2 nuclear reactors. This is, of course, kind of goes along with the $6 billion in trade with the U.S. These are European countries that are supposed to be in line with U.S. policy, making these big deals with Russia. Putin says he's going to increase the size of Russia's military force by 137,000 troops. All right. Next up, Taiwan is sending armed drones to Kiev. This is kind of interesting, and I think it probably is the kind of thing that Russia and China are going to, take notice of as well, and, increase their trade and support for each other. Next up, Senator Marsha Blackburn traveled to Taiwan. This is the 3rd congressional visit this month. Now, I think this is the 3rd high-level congressional delegation, but actually the 4th high-level delegation that the U.S. has sent to China this month. Now, some other stories on China from my news roundup at the Institute. We have 5 Chinese planes crossing over the Taiwan Strait. I believe this was on the 26th. And then on the 27th, we have 15 Taiwanese planes cross the median line, these were 5 Chinese planes crossing the median line in the Taiwan Strait, and then 15 Chinese planes crossing the median line in the Taiwan Strait. Now, this is something China would have never done before the U.S. started sending all the congressional delegations to Taiwan. So obviously, this is a response to the U.S. provocations. And then the U.S. sailed 2 warships through the Taiwan Strait. This kind of keeps up with the pace of the U.S. doing this once a month. Now, I believe there's 2 warships, which it's usually just 1 destroyer. I do believe these are 2 cruisers. I'm not sure how the math works out here and how China is going to interpret this, if it's maybe an increased provocation or not. But this is likely going to make the situation worse, not better. Taiwan on Thursday unveiled plans, this would have been last Thursday, to increase its military budget by about 14% after China launched its largest ever military exercises around the island that were, of course, in response to Pelosi's visit to Taipei. And the State Department is going to be selling $2 billion in attack helicopters to Australia. The U.S. is currently waging large-scale war games, these pitch black war games in that region, and it involves India and Japan, all these countries in northern Australia, and so these are going to be seen, I think, by China as a major provocation. All right, couple stories on Afghans. The first I have here is from myself and Will Porter. Stranded Afghan refugees protest prison-like conditions in the UAE. Hundreds of Afghans waiting for resettlement in the U.S. protested in the United Arab Emirates on Monday and Tuesday, with one angry demonstrator likening poor conditions in custody to modern prisons. Washington evacuated an estimated 85,000 refugees from Afghanistan as the U.S. created government in Kabul fell to the Taliban 1 year ago. Thousands of those Afghans are now in a state of limbo, placed in camps around the UAE as they wait for permission to enter the United States. One facility located on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi, dubbed the Emirates Humanitarian City, is the UAE's primary site for displaced Afghans. Once holding 12,000 refugees, some 6,500 remain there. However, while the Emirati government likes to claim the camps provide high-quality housing, sanitation, health, clinical counseling, education, and food services, many of its residents are growing desperate to leave after months of confinement. Nearly 1 year, and there have been in detention camps is like a modern prison. No one is allowed to go out. They don't know when we will be slated to permanently to any country, one Afghan at the camp told Reuters. Another inhabitant described the deteriorating mental health of those who live there, saying that many do not know when they will find a new long-term home and are in a consistent state of uncertainty about their futures. Complaints about the lengthy resettlement process boiled over until unrest last week, with protesters erupting around the camp on Monday and Tuesdays and videos circulating online. Crowds of demonstrators were seen marching through the streets of Abu Dhabi and demanding action from the government. Protests previously took place in the camp in February amid reports that resettlement cases were not being processed, leading to a U.S. State Department official to visit this facility in May and apologize for the delays. I told them that I was really sorry it was taking so long, and I was as frustrated as they were, frankly. But I also asked for their understanding of how hard we've been working to get the system going, the official said. Now, I gotta say, if I were standing in front of a bunch of people that were in what they called a prison, and I would not say I'm as frustrated as they were. You just don't understand the level of frustration, because you could fly back to America and they can't. For many Afghans stranded in humanitarian city, however, those assurances rang hollow, with one resident telling the Huffington Post they were merely the latest in a series of broken promises. A family profiled by CBS News earlier this month also described the camp as a prison. Day by day, the situation is tough. This is exactly like a prison, one Afghan man told the outlet. Though he and his wife had permission to enter the U.S., they are still waiting for Washington to approve their 1-year-old daughter. So, this girl was born in the humanitarian city, and the U.S. won't give her permission to enter the United States. So now 3 people are stuck there. And it's not just the UAE. Myself and Will Porter wrote this for the Libertarian Institute yesterday, August 28th. Afghan refugees say base in Kosovo has become prison 1 year after evacuation. The State Department has routinely touted the success of flying tens of thousands of Afghans from Kabul as the country fell to the Taliban. A year later, thousands of the refugees are languishing in camps worldwide as they wait for Washington to allow them to enter America. In Kosovo, the U.S. opened up Camp Lida next to Liya, maybe Liya, next to the U.S. Army base Bond Steel. When Liya opened in August 29, 2021, 1 year ago today, the Pentagon said it would close in 365 days, or today, and act as a lily pad for Afghan refugees. The migrants were told that they will only remain in Kosovo for a short time before receiving permission to enter the U.S. or a third country, but many Afghans remain at Liya, and the DoD has scrapped plans to close the base. Speaking with DW, some of the camp's residents said Liya facility had become a prison. A prisoner can have access to his case. He can ask about his case, why he is here, how long he will be in detention. If we ask that, they don't give us any reason why we are in the camp and for how long, one man said. Another noted that he had been unable to earn money for his family and send them back to Afghanistan, saying his children are going hungry. Many of the permanent residents of Laya say Washington has been opaque about the status of their immigration application, declining to offer details while keeping them in a state of limbo. They told us that we were here for a couple months, but we are here for almost a year. After 8 months, they say, you are not eligible to come to America. We asked them what's the reason. They didn't tell us, an Afghan refugee told DW. Others say we received no response from the U.S. after several months. While the most detainees lack resources to hire a lawyer, one higher profile resident at Laya, a former Afghan intelligence head, Mohammed Ashraf Shawari, has an ex-Pentagon official working on his behalf. After meeting Shawari while working in Afghanistan as an intelligence analyst, Julie Sears has become an attorney and agreed to represent the Afghan national as he navigates the resettlement process. I think the treatment is highly improper, especially in cases like my clients who provide tremendous assistance at great risk to his life, Sears told DW. I understand that there are others in similar positions to him in the camp. It's just shocking to me the very forward treatment they've been getting through this process. Like the thousands of Afghans stranded in humanitarian city in the UAE, residents of Camp Laya protested over the summer. One key complaint of the refugees in both countries was the deteriorating mental health among detainees. Some people are depressed. Some people have psychological problems, a man told DW. Kosovo's prime minister approved of Washington extending the life of Camp Laya's beyond the initial one-year agreement, but declined to make a public comment. All right, so that's about all I have on Afghanistan. I think I have just one more story in my news roundup that the Biden administration, actually two. The Biden administration reported on Monday that it will continue talks with the Taliban on the central bank reserves that have been seized by the U.S. as the U.S. has millions of Afghans are facing starvation. And so, this is important for the people of Afghanistan, but it also makes me wonder a little bit about the Zawahiri drone assassination, because initially we heard, well, the U.S. was going to break off talks because Zawahiri was living in Kabul, but now we hear the U.S. is going to continue talks, so maybe there's a little bit more nuance to that situation, as I originally discussed on the show. Now, the other story here is the Taliban accused Pakistan of allowing American drones to access Afghanistan through Pakistani airspace. I'm not sure what the Taliban can, if anything, do about this, but that they're raising alarm and raising the flag here, I think is important. All right, the last of my articles I have today is the one I wrote for antiwar.com on August 26th. Biden receives bipartisan criticism for bombing Syria. After 3 days of airstrikes against Syria, Shia groups allied with the Syrian government, some members of Congress are taking aim at the White House. Democrat Senator Chris Murphy called for rethinking American troop presence in the Middle East. Republicans capitalized on the fighting to call for an end to nuclear talks with Iran. On Tuesday, U.S. Central Command announced that it carried out airstrikes near Deir al-Zor, Syria, targeting Iranian-backed militias. Tehran denies any ties to the groups the U.S. is fighting in Syria. On Wednesday, 3 American soldiers were injured in attacks on their base and an oil field controlled by U.S. CENTCOM. Are controlled by the U.S. CENTCOM responded with a helicopter strike on the alleged attackers. The U.S. carried out strikes on Shia militias again on Thursday. After the third day of fighting, the Pentagon told CNN the U.S. had once again established deterrence in Syria. Now, I don't think that this is necessarily true. I just think that this is what the Pentagon is saying. But I did think that quote from CNN was kind of important to understanding what the U.S. is thinking and wanting to do in Syria. When they say we're looking to establish deterrence against the Shia groups, it means they want to keep the Assad government in line. In response to the escalation and fighting over 3 days, some members of Congress are critical of President Joe Biden's decisions. While Senator Chris Murphy said he approved of Biden's decisions this week, and he said they promote a review of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. It is past time to rethink about the wisdom of having so many Americans spread so thinly across the region. Murphy additionally questions Biden's authority to wage war in Syria. I remain concerned about any decision to undertake unauthorized military action when the Constitution and the war powers require the president to come to Congress to obtain the authority, the senator wrote in a statement. So I think this is actually big. Chris Murphy is a pretty party line Democrat. And so, of course, he's going to come out and say, well, I don't have any problems with anything Biden is currently doing, and then go into his actual criticisms. And I think we actually got a lot from him there. I'm very surprised by that. And I think it is some, decent news. Chris Murphy is a higher ranking Democrat, and I believe was even not like top considered, but, impossible for the Secretary of State job. Now, the man is a rabid lunatic on Russia. That's important to remember, too. Across the aisle, Republicans view the fight as an opportunity to throw cold water on any potential agreement that would see Washington and Tehran return to compliance with the Iran nuclear deal. Representative Michael McCall tweeted, "These attacks by Iran's proxies against the U.S. service members show why we cannot cut a bad nuclear deal with Iran. The Biden administration must walk away from this bad deal that will fuel Iran's terrorist attack on U.S. soldiers and civilians." The Pentagon spokesperson, Brigadier General Pat Ryder, claimed the fighting in Syria would not impact talks to save the Iran deal. "We'll defend our people no matter where they are attacked or when they are attacked, so the two really aren't interrelated." This is, I think, probably the worst kind of Pentagon-Washington thinking you could have where, well, for us, the two topics are related. I don't worry about the nuclear deal. I just worry about defending troops in Syria. And so I don't think there's going to be an issue if we're bombing troops in Syria that we say are tied to Iran. Now, are these groups tied to Iran? I don't actually know. We're not seeing a whole big response from Tehran, so is that possible that they're just not, and that the U.S. is essentially bombing Assad's forces here, which are probably most interested in killing off the Islamic State. And, of course, you had the official Pentagon position being, we're in Syria to take on the Islamic State. Well, that's really not true, but that's what they claim. Iran did not mention the nuclear deal in its response to the U.S. strikes, but called the bombing a terrorist act against the Syrian people. American army against the Syrian people as a terrorist act against the population groups and fighters in the occupation and denied any affiliation with them to the Islamic Republic of Iran. So he's saying that, look, this isn't our groups, but we still don't like it. We like Assad, and the U.S. shouldn't be bombing places around the Middle East. Now, just a few more stories for my news roundup before I wrap up today. A lot going on in the Middle East right now. Mossad Director David Barna will travel to the U.S. to meet with officials about the Iran nuclear deal. I think he's coming sometime later in this week. This is important because he's very hawkish, one of the most hawkish people on the nuclear deal, and going to be very against it. So we'll see what he meets with and if he makes any progress. Australia diplomats were targeted by an explosion near the entrance to Baghdad's Green Dome. No injuries were reported. And then I got like a bunch of serious stories here, but one that I actually didn't write up an article on, but of course something I'm very interested in is the conditions at the Al-Hol prison camp in Syria. There's tens of thousands of people living here. I think like most of them, 50 to 60,000 are living as refugees in the camp, but then there's like 10,000 people, I think actually less than, I think it's like 8,400. They're actually in the prison at Al-Hol, and the Syrian Kurds said they raided the prison and the refugee camp and arrested suspected ISIS members and stopped like torturing from going on. I have no idea if any of that's true. Part of me is very doubtful that some of that is true, but it's possible that these are like the wives of ISIS fighters and now the adult children of ISIS fighters who have been living in this camp for some of them nearly a decade, and there's no real potential of them leaving at any point soon. So if there's some nasty stuff going on there, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me, but I could see the Kurds carrying out a raid and then claiming that there's a lot more going on in that camp than there actually was. Anyways, thank you all so much for tuning in today. I'll have plenty more content coming this week. Doing a lot of writing for either the Institute or antiwar.com, so be sure to follow me on Twitter and catch up with everything I'm doing. Thanks, everyone.